What you're about to see is an attorney general who can't answer a yes or no question, not about policy, not about politics, but about whether a man pardoned by the president, who then went on to molest 2 children, should be allowed to collect government money. That question was asked directly. The answer wasn't a no, and when the senator pushed back, he was called a liar. That's the room we're walking into.
Van Hollen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, this is an outrageous, unprecedented slush fund that you set up. Simple question, will individuals who assaulted Capitol Hill police officers be eligible for this fund?
Well, as it makes plain, anybody is...
Just let me know if they're eligible for the fund.
As was made plain yesterday, anybody in this country is eligible to apply if they believe they're a victim of weaponization.
Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you this. Are there going to be rules that say that if you've assaulted a Capitol Hill police officer or committed a violent crime, you will not be eligible? Why not make that a rule?
I expect that, because I'm not one of the commissioners setting up the rules, I expect that there will be rules.
You're appointing 4 of the 5 members, aren't you, Mr. Attorney General?
Pardon me?
You're appointing 4 of the 5 members.
I am appointing all 5 members.
You can certainly set up the rules. I would hope you would make a rule that anyone convicted of assaulting a police officer or a violent crime is simply not eligible. They should not apply.
Well,
let me ask you this, because you compared it to the Keepsiegel case. But I think you know full well that in that case, the settlement agreement was approved by a federal judge, including the payments to people who were not originally parties to the lawsuit. No federal judge has approved this fund, have they, Mr. Attorney General?
No federal judge did approve this.
So that's a big difference between this case and the case that you compared it to.
No, it's not.
Did a judge sign off on this case?
No.
A judge did sign off on the other one.
Yes, but your question was whether it's a big difference. It's not.
Of course it is, because that allows for an independent person to look at it rather than the
There was no independence. There was no independence. There was a single commissioner. A judge signed off on it. A judge had nothing to do with deciding the money.
There was a judge who looked at it and signed off on it. So to compare that case to this one is incredibly deceptive. Let me ask you this about the Epstein case, because as we speak, many Epstein survivors are in New York. They're reading portions of the Epstein files about the abuse that they suffered. Otherwise, they might have been here with us today. At a House hearing, your predecessor refused to acknowledge the pain experienced by some of those victims when the administration improperly released their names and identifying information. So I want to know where you stand. I spoke to the representatives of some of the Epstein survivors yesterday. They are extremely frustrated that you keep calling for people to come forward with more evidence, but you have not met with them to hear their stories. So simple question. If I connect you with these survivors, will you meet with them?
Absolutely, and what you just said is false. I have met with them. I've met with many of the lawyers for the survivors of victims, as did Attorney General Bondi. So whoever told you that, unfortunately, gave you bad information.
Okay.
But I would encourage them to reach out to the Department of Justice, because like we do every single day, we absolutely care for victims, and we absolutely want to hear from them and their lawyers.
Well, I've been told directly from the representatives they've not had a chance, at least this group, to meet with you. So
did they represent that they asked?
So I'm glad to hear that.
Did they represent they asked for a meeting?
Can I ask you to commit that the Justice Department will not recommend a pardon for anyone named in the Epstein files?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said.
Can you commit that the Justice Department, you, the Acting Attorney General, will not recommend a pardon for people named in the Epstein files?
When you say people named, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of, quote, people named.
How about Ghislaine Maxwell? Can you commit that you will?
Yes, I can commit to that, of course.
Okay. Let me go back to this slush fund, because there's also an individual who, after being pardoned by the president, went on to molest 2 children. And that person actually tried to buy the silence of these children by saying that he would pay them some of the funds that he was hoping to get from your slush fund. Can you commit to making the rules so that that person is not eligible for a payout under this fund?
Well, you're obviously lying in your question, because there's no way that this person committed to that But the slush fund, as you call it, which is not, didn't exist.
I am certainly
but I
not
can
lying.
commit.
Mr. Attorney General, don't ever do that again. I am reporting
Do what again?
what he said. He said on the expectation that he hoped to get some of the funds from a payout. He's been
From
hearing
the,
what
you
we've all
said from
been
the
hearing.
slush fund, Senator, and that didn't exist when he said that.
This is the fund that the president and all of you have been telegraphing all along that you're going to use to help the president's friends.
Can you point to a
Mr.
single
Attorney General,
telegraph
I have a
I
last
made?
question.
What telegraph did I
have a last question for
Okay.
you. Do you know that it is a criminal offense to lie to Congress?
I am very well aware of that.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
What you're about to see is an attorney general who was asked one of the simplest moral questions imaginable and couldn't answer it. Not a legal trap, not a constitutional riddle, just this. Should a man pardoned by the president who then went on to molest 2 children be allowed to collect money from a government fund? The answer wasn't no. And when the senator pushed back, he was called a liar. That's the room we're walking into. Let me start with something most people missed because the hearing opened with a question that seemed procedural but was the whole story compressed into 30 seconds. Senator Van Hollen asked whether individuals who assaulted Capitol police officers on January 6th would be eligible for a newly created compensation fund administered by the Justice Department. The Attorney General said he wasn't the one setting the rules. But here's what you need to know. He appointed 4 of the 5 commissioners who are setting them. When you control the decision-makers but claim distance from the decisions, you've built something lawyers call plausible deniability, a system designed not for accountability, but for insulation from it. This is not a bureaucratic footnote. This is the architecture of how power protects itself. And that's the thread running through this entire hearing. Stay with me because it gets significantly worse. Now let me explain why the fund comparison Van Hollen raised matters more than it sounds. Blanche defended the fund by citing a prior settlement, the Keeps Eagle case. His argument? That settlement created a similar compensation mechanism, so this is nothing new. But there is one critical difference he didn't mention. In the Keeps Eagle case, a federal judge reviewed and approved the terms. An independent party examined the framework before a single dollar moved. That is not bureaucratic friction. That is the entire point of judicial oversight. When you remove the judge and replace them with commissioners appointed by the official under scrutiny, you haven't built a victim compensation fund. You've built a political instrument that looks like one. Van Hollen made this distinction clearly. Blanche dismissed it. And if the Attorney General cannot acknowledge the value of judicial oversight on a fund he controls, what does that tell you about how he views oversight on everything else? Now here's where the story escalates, and I want you to hold this moment because it reframes everything you just heard. The hearing shifted to pardons. This is where a pattern became visible that most viewers didn't catch in real time. This administration has issued pardons to individuals with documented histories of serious misconduct. Some were restored to standing, some returned to public life, and in at least one case Van Hollen raised directly, a pardoned individual went on to sexually abuse 2 children, and then allegedly attempted to buy their silence by promising a share of money he hoped to receive from this very fund. A man freed by presidential pardon, 2 more child victims, a government fund used as leverage against them. Van Hollen put that allegation on the record, in a Senate hearing, under the scrutiny of cameras and colleagues. Blanche's response was not, "We will investigate that," not, "If accurate, that person will be excluded." He said, "You are lying in your question." I've thought about why that specific response matters, and it's not just about the tone. When a senior official responds to a factual allegation not with rebuttal but with an attack on the person making it, it tells you something precise. There is no evidence to offer. A denial backed by documentation would have looked different. A denial backed by process would have sounded different. What we got was a power move, shifting the terrain of the hearing away from the substance of the claim and toward the character of the senator raising it. That is not the behavior of an institution confident in its record. That is the behavior of an institution protecting a position. And Van Hollen's response, "Don't ever do that again," was more than anger. It was a senator defending something structural, the premise that oversight only functions if members can raise factual allegations without being branded liars by the officials they are overseeing. If that premise collapses, oversight collapses. Now I want to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell, because this is the part of the hearing that will stay with me longest. Maxwell was convicted of federal sex trafficking charges in connection with Jeffrey Epstein's abuse network. She is currently serving a 20-year sentence. As this hearing was taking place, Epstein survivors were gathered elsewhere, reading portions of the newly released files aloud publicly because they could not be in that room. They were sitting in another building, reading accounts of their own abuse entered into a public record, while the AG was in this room being asked whether their abusers might receive presidential pardons. Van Hollen asked for a commitment. Will the DOJ refuse to recommend a pardon for anyone named in the Epstein files? Blanche gave a one-word answer on Maxwell specifically, but he could not extend that commitment beyond her name. That gap between what was promised and what remains possible is exactly where survivors' fear lives. And I want to be direct about why that gap is not abstract. When victims of serious federal crimes watch legal proceedings, they are not following politics. They are watching to see whether the institutions they reported to will hold. When they see a fund without judicial oversight, when they see pardons issued to individuals who then harm others, when they see an AG who cannot commit that their abusers won't receive clemency, they are not being paranoid. They are reading the signals correctly. The message being sent, whether intentionally or not, is this: your case may be subject to reversal depending on who is in power. That is what institutional erosion looks like from the inside. Not a dramatic collapse, a series of gaps, each one deniable, each one explicable in isolation, but together forming a pattern that victims recognize before analysts do. So let me pull back and show you the structural picture, because this is the lesson I want you to leave with. A justice system does not derive its authority from laws alone. It derives its authority from the perception that those laws apply consistently, regardless of who is being investigated and regardless of who is being protected. The moment the public stops believing that, something breaks that legislation cannot fix and appointments cannot restore. Think about what's happened in just this one hearing. A fund with no judicial oversight, administered by commissioners the AG appointed, potentially accessible to pardoned violent offenders, allegedly used as leverage against child abuse victims, and the official responsible could not say no to any of it. That is not a policy disagreement. That is a stress test of whether accountability still functions. And here's what makes it dangerous at scale. When the person at the top signals through behavior, not words, that loyalty matters more than transparency, that signal travels. Career prosecutors watch how leadership responds to pressure from Capitol Hill. Federal agents watch whether following difficult evidence leads to protection or exposure. Commissioners watch whether anyone audits their work. When none of those checks visibly function, the people inside the system adjust. Not all at once, quietly, incrementally. This is how institutions hollow out, not through a single dramatic breach, but through 1,000 small decisions made by people who learned that accountability is selective. So what does accountability actually require here? 3 things. First, judicial oversight on any compensation fund administered by the executive branch, not as a formality, but as a structural requirement. A judge is not an obstacle, a judge is the point. Second, a binding public commitment from DOJ that no individual convicted of crimes against Epstein survivors will be considered for clemency. Not a one-word answer about Maxwell, but a written, enforceable policy. Third, an independent inspector general review of every pardon issued in cases where the pardoned individual subsequently committed a new crime. Not a congressional hearing. An independent review with subpoena power and a public report. These are not partisan demands. They are the minimum conditions for a justice system that can still be believed. Democracy does not fail in a single moment that everyone remembers. It fails in the moments that feel manageable. A question deflected, a commitment withheld, an allegation labeled a lie. The survivors who couldn't be in that hearing room were watching. The question is whether we are too.